This is the Lew Rockwell Show.
What a pleasure it is to have as our guest this morning Dr. Ron Paul. Ron is, of course, the author of many books, most recently In the Fed, and he has an extraordinary new book coming out on April 19th called Liberty Defined, the 50 most important issues that affect our liberty. Ron, of course, is also the chairman of the Subcommittee on Monetary Policy. But Ron, before we get into all that and what's happening with both past and future committee hearings, I wanted to congratulate you on what you did to Ben Bernanke yesterday. And I noticed that the New York Sun editorial this morning correctly described it as you're having eclipsed Ben Bernanke and shown him up as, we won't say a liar, but as somebody who is at least peddling falsehoods, even if he believes in them.
Yeah, I enjoyed reading that, and it was very generous. Seth Lipsky wrote that, and he used to work for the Wall Street Journal, and he understands a little bit about sound money. But I thought he was very generous in complimenting me on that, little interrogation there. But sometimes I get a little frustrated because you don't get very much time to cross-examine. They throw this stuff out, but usually the cross-examination comes on the internet. Everybody follows up and chimes in and starts talking about who said what. And so, they like to close you out on time, but in this day and age, nobody gets closed out because it gets on the internet.
Although I do have to say, I think they shut you up early. I don't believe you got your 5 minutes. I think that you were right about that. I'm going to have to go back and time that with a stopwatch.
Well, they tend to do that at times because they're still, although we did get a lot of support last year on the Audit the Fed bill, there's still behind-the-scenes support for the Fed. Interestingly enough, I'm not sure the members are so keyed in on that as much as well-placed staffers in various parts of all committees, both on the Republicans and the Democratic side.
I can remember you saying some years ago that the worst congressmen were the ex-staffers.
That is true. They know the system and they can manipulate so many. And that's why I was always pleased with my staff, is that they were driven philosophically, and I didn't have to be checking up on them all the time. Other members quite even admit to me that, he doesn't agree with me on this, so I have to be careful. And we even have some of them will call our office and talk to our staffers to double check when they want to really know what's going on.
Of course, there was that historic first meeting you had of your subcommittee when you had Tom DiLorenzo and Dick Vetter testify. And before I talk more about that, Ron, maybe you can't comment on this, but I wonder if they have saddled you with some of the most belligerent, bank-paid, and how shall I say, non-knowledgeable members of Congress I've ever seen who claim to know something about money and banking, but don't.
Yeah, and you know me well enough that I've always leaned on the side of being very, very generous with the opposition, and I was just hoping and assuming more than I accepted. You'd think I'd be more, less optimistic. But I always want a real honest discussion, from their viewpoint. So I was pretty surprised at how strong they were at attacking, the speakers and not dealing with the subject at all. So that to me was rather disappointing. But I also was surprised on the follow-up on that, on how much support they got from the banks. And I've always given the benefit of the doubt to anybody in the liberal camp, and, always driven by good intentions. And a lot of them are, they really believe that's the only way you can help the poor. But so many of them are pretending to help the poor at the same time. They become partners with big government and big banks, and they take care of themselves. But they win the votes, and they come across as champions of the poor. And, of course, that's why I've always argued the case that the marketplace is really the humanitarian approach. If you really care about people, prosperity, and good jobs and all, you have to believe in the marketplace.
And yet these hateful comments and the lies that we're told are actually a tribute to what you're doing. Doesn't it show that the Federal Reserve and the people who support the Fed and the banking industry, which I guess is the entire banking industry, are very much afraid of any scrutiny being brought to bear on the Federal Reserve on monetary policy from the standpoint of the Austrian school?
Yeah, and you know, I work with the assumption that eventually the truth wins out. I know sometimes it takes a while, but you know, truth won out about the fakery of the Bretton Woods Agreement. Finally the market overwhelmed. And I even told Bernanke this. I said, you have an opinion about gold, and I have an opinion, but it's irrelevant. It's not my opinion. He's arguing against 6,000 years of history and the natural tendency for people to want to use something of real value in exchange. It's no more complicated than that. And I remember Greenspan once telling me when I challenged him on that, he says, well, I think what we have done is we have learned as central bankers to make paper money work just like gold. You know, he knew gold worked right, and he said, but we have, in a way, I'm smart enough now to overcome that. And I think I concluded that little argument with saying, well, if that is the case, you've just repealed a lot of history.
So, Reiner, you've got another set of hearings coming up. I know you're going to have Jim Grant of Grant's Interest Rate Observer and also Professor Joe Salerno on. What is that hearing going to concentrate on?
Well, you know, our first one's concentrated on the fact that the Federal Reserve is responsible for the business cycle and the downturns, and therefore unemployment should be laid at their doorstep. Not 100%, but to a large degree. If you didn't have the business cycle, it'd be a head start. Then we have to just deal with over-taxation and over-regulation. But the business cycle will certainly be caused. This time it's going to deal with prices going up and trying to get a definition of inflation and why prices go up and why some prices go up more than others, and why you could have inflation as we had in the 20s and we didn't have the CPI going up at all. And that's what we want to talk about, because I think we have turned the bend on their ability to keep the price inflation a secret. You know, they kept pumping it up and downplaying it, but I think they've lost that PR fight. Nobody believes them anymore. You know, with the oil prices going up and gasoline prices going up, the cost of government going up, and Medicare going, all these things, and then they say, oh, don't sweat it. Price inflation is only 2%. And Bernanke said the other day, he says, my goal, and I know I can do it, you know, is the right amount of inflation. He says, we don't want too little and we don't want too much, and I know how to turn it off immediately. You know, I think he said that in a public interview. I have 100% confidence that I can turn that off. Yeah, by crashing the economy, he can turn off the price increases. Yeah, you know, if even then though he can't do it if he destroys the money. They were surprised about stagflation in the 70s. What is their surprise going to be like when they have an inflationary depression?
Ron, you mentioned oil. Brings to mind North Africa, what's happening in the whole Arab world. I was pleased to see your grilling of Hillary Clinton the other day at the International Relations Committee, the old Foreign Affairs Committee, when you tried to talk some sense to her.
Yeah, and you know, probably the statement that bothered me the most, and I brought it up, but she really didn't address it, is that in dealing with Libya, nothing is off the table. You know, and I even said that statement originally came from the previous administration when they talked about the Middle East, and what they were referring to was the fact that they would actually use nuclear weapons, because that was the question I think asked Bush was, you know, would that be taken off? Nothing's taken off the table. So I don't think that means, I'm not putting words in her mouth that they're thinking about it or willing to do it, but they are definitely willing to use military power, and then who knows, as we speak, they may be getting very close to it, and you know, it's insanity. And even some of the military people are now starting to back off because they know it's insane. I mean, with the so-called victory in Iraq, and what do we have there? A government that suppresses dissent even worse than some other countries. And we have the bogging down in Afghanistan, the bombing of Pakistan, and our threats toward Yemen and Somalia. So we're going to send in military troops into Libya. You know, and then they wonder why we have a financial crisis on our hand. But the market, once again, is going to win out on this. There will be a limit. Empires can't go on forever, and we may be fast approaching, because this all can shift rather quickly. Although the dollar is still the kingpin, people still use dollars. They're less enthusiastic about it, and one of these days they're going to just decide not so much to all run to the yen and the euro, but the people holding currencies around the world may rush to commodities, And of course, we're in the middle of a commodity boom right now, and that may continue, and that will turn our domestic welfare system around. It will turn around, our foreign policy as well, and it won't be favorable.
In your appearance with Elliot Spitzer the other day, you kept trying to make the point that he didn't want to hear, of course, that the military needs to be cut, that the empire needs to be cut. He kept trying to put words in your mouth that, first of all, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid should be cut. But I always think that from a political standpoint, your position of why the military needs to be cut first, all the foreign bases, the empire, and so forth, and then we can worry about these other things, which are, of course, politically, as far as the average American is concerned, much more difficult.
Yeah, when they do that, they say, the statement he wants to say is, you want to slash medical care for the elderly and the children. And therefore, that's impossible, so there will be no cuts. So if you turn it around and say, everything should be cut, none of it's constitutional, we should work in that direction, but why not work on cutting the military? This militarism and what we're doing overseas. And yes, we can cut the rest and work into it and let people opt out. Let the next generation just get out of it. They talk about opting out of Obamacare, but what about the opportunity for all of us to opt out of the whole government system? That's what we really need. This is where I'm encouraged. When I throw that out to the college kids, I think they're ready. Any of them that are well read and understand what's coming, they're willing to assume responsibility for themselves. But they need some help, like get me out of the tax system and get me out of this. And the young people no longer trust the government, and I think that's very healthy.
Ron, speaking of young people, I have a lot of them ask me to ask you this question. Are you going to run for president? People have pointed out that your recent fundraiser for Liberty PAC indicated that was sort of a testing the waters for possibly testing the waters.
In a way it is, and I've been as upfront as I can on this because there's no doubt I've thought about it, mainly because people make me think about it, because a lot of people ask me about it, and I do feel a bit of personal obligation to so many who have placed a fair amount of trust in me to continue this fight. So it is a possibility, as it always has been, but it's also a major decision on my part for personal reasons, political reasons, and it just is very tedious. And I'm going to make these trips, and I was very much upfront on that. It was not an announcement, but I was going to do more traveling. I asked if I could have help in traveling, in a private plane, which makes it much more effective. I can get more places, and it seems like that was well received. We raised a significant amount of dollars that will help. I will be going on Monday, and I can make 3 major cities in Iowa all in one day and still get to Washington. I mean, the efficiency of this is unbelievable. Not to talk about, staying out of the groping hands of the TSA. But then I go back to Iowa a little bit later on in March, as well as I'm going up to New Hampshire. So obviously that has some implications. And maybe when I finish all those trips, I will feel better about it and feel energized enough to take it on myself again to make that decision. Dr.
Ron Paul, thanks for coming on this morning. I want to urge everybody to read all of Ron's books. You can take a look at LRC at the listing of Ron Paul's books. Take a look at his archives there. Take a look especially at the book that's keeping Ben Bernanke and company up at night, and that's End the Fed. Pre-order as well his forthcoming book, Liberty Defined. Ron, thanks a million.
Thank you, Lew.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Lew Rockwell Show, produced by LewRockwell.com, the best-read libertarian website in the world. If you'd like to advertise on this podcast or on the website, email advertising LewRockwell.com. And thanks for listening.